Next one, we move on to the object recovery. So we already cover the entire virtual machine recovery, those kind of data restore. Now we look into the object recovery options that comes with application item recovery first thing. And then we also cover about the virtual machine guest OS file recovery. Okay, and also including agent. So first thing, we have Vim Explorer here. So this is the Vim trademark software here to browse your backup data for certain application item information. So when I open up the Vim Explorer, I can support these 5 different applications. So I will find that the Vim Explorer is pretty useful, especially for Exchange, SharePoint, Active Directory. But for database, it's a bit limited. As compared to other backup software, Vim is a bit loose out on this particular application item recovery level. Okay, so now Vim application item recovery. So they sometimes call it the AIR short form. Okay, application recovery short form. So first will be Vim Explorer for 5 applications only, right? Okay, so how about other application? If you're using like Lotus or Dominoes or other software that's not mentioned here, okay, then we can utilize another option called the on-demand sandbox from share backup to offer manual application item recovery using client software to connect backup data VM. Okay, so this is another options. So the on-demand sandbox ensure backup we will also cover later, okay, after lunch. So this will be another options for you to restore application data. Okay. So with this workaround, at least we have another options for us to read the application data from your backup. Okay. So do not worry if your application is not supported here, at least you can still utilize the on-demand sandbox to try and restore from that particular process. Alright. So let's see. Over here, first thing, we have the Vim Explorer for Microsoft Exchange. So when you bring up this Vim Explorer for Microsoft Exchange, you will see that over here. And just a moment, let me just open up the recovery. So if you go to restore, select VMware and then select from backup, and you can select this application item restore already. Okay. So for my case, I have the SQL Server only. I can select my SQL virtual machine backup and browse. They will bring up the Vim Explorer software. So you can see here in Vim Explorer. Okay, so pretty fast as compared to earlier version. Okay, V11 quite fast already. Now, when you bring up the Vim Explorer, you will see here, they come with additional window, just like what I showed you just now. Over here, you will see I am able to check how many mailboxes are there inside your Exchange server. And then from the mailboxes, I can even see the internal items such as your inbox item, junk, deleted item, contact, etc. So a lot of things is protected from the virtual machine data level. I can now restore this Exchange DB data, okay, selecting individual item if you want to. Okay, selecting individual item. So from here, as you can see, we can utilize this Vim Explorer for Microsoft Exchange to compare with production server to see any item it is missing in your production, but it's actually shown in your backup. So you can at least filter which item to restore, okay, for your end user. Hard delete item is supported because we back up the entire virtual machine data. So for recycle bin function, all this will also be protected in your backup data instead. Okay. The education home in place, so for audit purposes or for archive purposes, it's also supported. And subversion folder, all this will be also supported in the Vim Explorer for Microsoft Exchange. So pretty useful over here. You don't need to restore the entire VM anymore. You can look for certain smaller granular item here, so-called. Okay, so this is for Exchange, and we have similar things for Microsoft Active Directory. Now, if you plan to restore certain items such as user account or computer account, usually user account will be the more important one, because most of your config, your permission is based on the user account, even your Exchange account itself. So here you can perform a compare with your production too, so that I can filter out those missing items in your production that is valid in your backup data that you can perform restore from there. Okay, they will restore original password, and we also cover GPO items, which is very important for domain environment, especially when production environment come with like hundreds or even thousands of GPO. So if you actually got some issue with one of the GPO, maybe causing some blue screen or error to the user, you can always restore from this backup. Okay, not necessarily you need to change it again. It's not easy, especially a lot of GPU going on. Then other items such as your DNS record, etc., will also be protected because you back up the entire domain controller VM. I can actually restore this item itself. Okay. So over here you see I have the SharePoint support. Now Microsoft SharePoint is the intranet software usually for Microsoft to share documents, information, etc. in a web application format. So all the end user client can connect to this so-called web app, websites to look into certain information and also some file sharing purposes also. Now, this particular web application is supported by a back-end database. So in order for us to browse the SharePoint data like what we see here, with all your pages, your information, etc., that we can restore not only items, we can also restore sites and pages. This is a web app here. And we can restore all this with the help of the local or staging server. Now the local or staging server here is the one helps to mount your database in use. SharePoint require a Microsoft SQL database works together to support all this information. That's why if you plan to restore Microsoft SharePoint using Vim Explorer, I will need to also mount the DB. You're using this remote staging server usually. Now, why do we need this? Pretty easy. Your backup server comes with a free edition SQL Express. Now, that free edition can only mount or support database instance with 10 GB maximum size. Now, your production DB usually will be more than 10 GB, okay, most of the time. That's why if you are utilizing your backup server SQL Express to mount the DB, it will not be possible. You will get some error messages, etc. You need to select another remote, okay, paid SQL server to help you to do that. Okay, so how do you do this? Now, if you do have this limitation and you plan to change or connect to a different database server, you can do it from the Vim Explorer point of view. Okay, so later in your lab, you can try to open this up and see whether you have this option or not. Okay, so you have this Vim Explorer open up. You see that over here, the staging server cannot be found from your normal backup console. Okay, so your staging server is located here. I actually open up the Vim Explorer for Microsoft SQL, yeah? Similar case to SharePoint, basically, because they are running on DB. So when you click on the main menu, General Options, okay, so under main menu, General Options, then you will see this, what we call Helper SQL Server. This Helper SQL Server is the one that usually comes with paid license to support larger database instance size. So you can put in here how to connect to your SQL server either by IP or by, for example, your particular hosting, okay, to your DB server, and then what account you use for the server, and also your SQL DB. This is just to give you some remote access connectivity to the SQL server to help you to actually mount your database from your backup data so that I can support the SharePoint item browsing because all those are stored in the DB itself. Okay, same thing goes to your SQL restore. We do require all these things here. Okay, first thing. So you see that over here, this Explorer is open. Okay, so remember, when you are doing restoration, okay, Vim do have some limitation here. For example, Vim job priority. So first, restore from backup and recover from VM replica. This job have the highest priority. Second comes to backup and replication job. Okay. So what do they tell you here? If you are performing a restore, your backup and replication will not able to run because your backup data is in use and your backup and replication will be suspended for that time being. So over here you will see if you are utilizing Vim Explorer like this. Now to Vim you are now still doing data restore. So if your Vim Explorer is still open, it might cause you some problem during backup. Because Vim will say that, okay, the backup is still mounted and browsing. So Vim will thought that you are still doing restoration and they will not able to perform a backup because the backup file is now in use by this Vim Explorer mounting principle. Okay, that's why if you do not want your backup to fail, and especially after you have already done your restore, do remember to close this Vim Explorer to conclude the task so that Vim backup data will go back to normal and your particular backup will able to run again. Alright, so you will see backup and replication job comes later, and lowest priority will be sure backup job. So if you have sure backup job running, halfway and your backup replication task actually started based on schedule, they will complete or end the sure backup job. Make way for the backup and replication job to run. Okay, so this requires remote and local staging server as I mentioned before. And if your Vim Explorer still open up, it might cause your backup or replication to fail. Things like this. Okay. So SQL Server, similar case, I can browse my SQL content just like what I showed earlier to see how many instances are there, and I can offer to restore table level data. Okay, so I can browse, I can restore, but it will only able to support table level. If you have transaction log backup ongoing, then I can restore data up to transaction log accuracy. Okay, so you will see here, with this, it will be certain limitation sometimes because we are able to restore on table level, might not be granular enough for certain occasion. For example, if administrator is looking onto restoring line item or column item, then you will have issue here using this particular table level restore. That's why using SQL restore in Vim, maybe we can utilize some workaround like restore to BAK file and then send the BAK file back to the DB admin and ask them to restore manually on their own, for example. Okay. Instant DB publish is another option, but later we will actually introduce in V11 Vim add-on one additional option too. Okay. So over here you will see SQL DB having some limitation. Okay, then also come with Oracle. That's why if you find that these two might not be a good choice for you, you can also try to utilize the on-demand sandbox. For these two applications, utilize another client software to connect to the DB server so that for you to pull certain data item out. Okay? Because using Vim Explorer, they can only offer table level restore. Oracle, if not mistaken, they can only offer database instant level restore. So it is not granular enough for certain scenario. Okay? So here you see we do support ASM, data guard, all these are fully supported now in Vim. Radio logs, similar case, if you do have transaction log backup, we can roll back up to transaction log accuracy. And we can also browse RMAN created backup. Our expert has database or has RMAN backup for them to restore manually from Oracle point of view. Okay, so these are some workaround. Yes, always Vim is actually lack of in this particular area to restore application item data, such as DB, for example. That's why you will see only 5 applications is supported here. Basically, it's not their bread and butter, I would say. Okay. So these are a few things here available. Then in version 11, we have this new support for Microsoft SQL Server. So after you back up your data, now I can choose to perform database instant recovery for Microsoft SQL Server. So you don't need to restore data back to production first. This works similar to your instant VM recovery that offers also data read and write options. So after I trigger this task, they will basically mount your backup data DB inside your repository to the SQL server that you have chosen. So they will mount only as one of the database instance. They don't change the entire server instead. Okay. That's why over here it's pretty useful, especially when you have certain database instance having problem. Not having issue on everything, but only certain instance. Then I can use this to recover those instances only. And your application can go back to normal, first thing. And your data restore, data transfer will happen in the background. So it will buy you time and shorten your overall database RTO, okay, for your service to come back online again. Okay, so you will see here, utilizing database instant recovery, we will require some short downtime when you are switching over to the restored DB. Okay, so we are mounting the DB from your backup data to let you read it, and your read-write can happen. Your changes, your new data will be captured in the mount server cache, same case here, like the instant VM recovery. And then when you do switch over, they will help you to actually copy the changes, apply into your DB instance. Okay, so this is the instant VM recovery. So you will see here the instant DB recovery here works quite similar, and they are running on service level. That's why after you trigger the task, if you close the Vim Explorer, this task will still continue to run, no issue, because they are running on the service level. And that's why if you accidentally close the Vim Explorer, you can just bring up the same Vim Explorer again for the same VM backup data. They will continue to show you this instant recovery page that you can continue to work with it. So after you trigger the task, you will see that they have the switch DB options or things for you to change from one to another. Okay. So you will see here switch DB to production storage. Now, after you trigger the task, your application instance basically come back online on that particular SQL server. You can straight away use it, and they will start to copy the data from the backup to your production already, doing restoration in the backend. You don't need to trigger the migrate to production here. You need to trigger the switch over usually, because normally we don't put it to online. If not, your downtime will be hard for you to plan. So we can put in manual switch over and schedule a downtime with the user to maybe shut down the service for a short time. I switch over, then they will actually copy all those changes to apply to the restored DB, and then switch your connectivity back to the production DB instance instead. Okay, that's why doing the switch over, it will require some downtime here. Okay. Now, they work quite similar, but they are utilizing a different protocol here as compared to instant VM recovery. So here, I give you this documentation here. Now, for instant DB recovery, okay, for instant DB recovery, this is what they show you here. Okay, so when you perform this database instant recovery, they support only for Microsoft SQL Server. using Vim Explorer. Okay? Now you see that over here, when you start the task, what happens? Vim Explorer uses the backup file to start two iSCSI mount sessions because database usually require LUN or block access data using iSCSI or FC. So here we can utilize network for iSCSI access. So the first mount here will use to publish the DB to your target SQL server. Okay? Attach it as an target SQL server instance. So you are basically presenting your repository via mount server help, okay? Using iSCSI connectivity to connect to the database instance from your backup data. This is to publish, and they are able to run and read the DB straight away. Okay, so this is the first thing that they do, and your data change will be captured in the cache here, as you can see. Now, while the published database is online, all changes in the DB file that occur after publishing are saved in the cache on the mount server. You see here. That's why this is how they can offer data read-write for your database instance. Right? So the second mount will be done. The second mount is used to copy your DB file in the background back to your target SQL server. So you are still utilizing the DB data from the repository, but at the same time in the background they are moving or copying this data back to production. Okay? But the changes is still occur in the mount server cache. That's why later I will need to apply this cache change into the target server DB instance so that bringing the data to the latest point in time before we can publish it as a service. Okay, so this is the steps here. I share you the documentation you can read through. So you will see here, after the particular database file are copied on the target server, Vim Explorer will utilize the cache to synchronize the changes to your DB file. Okay, so this happens later after all the data copy back to your production SQL server. I need to plan a short downtime to perform a switch over, as you can see here. After synchronization, data copy back to your production SQL server, you can switch over to the up-to-date copies of your database. Okay? So over here, during switchover, what do they do? When you trigger switchover, Vim Explorer will stop the publish. That's why this is where your downtime comes. There will be no connectivity to that particular DB instance. Yes, it's already stopped. Then they will utilize a cache to synchronize the difference to your already restored DB instance in your server. After all this has been synchronized, your data is up to date now. They will drop the published DB from your backup data and now switch and utilize the recovered DB instance in your Microsoft SQL Server. So all this will be done by Vim using API audits together with your Microsoft SQL Server together. Okay, so they're utilizing iSCSI here instead. Okay? So all this is automated, easy for Vim to help you to do all these things. You just need to know what you need to trigger after certain process, such as your switch over task. So after your data already been copied back to production, you will see that your status now will be ready to switch. So when you see ready to switch, it's time for you to plan a downtime to announce service to be down for a short period of time, maybe half an hour to 1 hour, then trigger the switchover to also update the changes back to your production DB. Okay? So this is the thing that you need to be careful. Okay? They do have downtime when you're performing switchover. Okay? So when you trigger the task, after the service is up, okay, it will continue to run here. All right? So those are for application item recovery. So if you still have other application support, best to go with the other workaround using on-demand sandboxing. Right? Now, if you want to restore certain files and folders from your virtual machine data backup, or even your agent backup, we do able to support this. We have the guest file recovery. Now, guest file recovery, we have a few options here. One being the instant file level recovery. File level recovery, they call it FLR. FLR. Now, for Windows, as you can see here, Windows backed up virtual machine and agent data, we can browse the data directly because most of the components in Vim are running on Windows. Okay. Now, if you have some Linux components such as Linux repository or Linux proxy, you can utilize them also for the multi-OS file level recovery, or they will deploy additional helper appliance VM to help mount your Linux or Unix file system. Okay, because Windows component cannot understand that. So if you have a already running proxy or repository, then this multi-OS file level recovery will be pretty fast also, usually like instance to mount the data. If you are having a file system that is not supported by any of these platforms, then you can trigger the instant virtual drive recovery to the original VM. So you can restore the VMBK only to the original VM. They can perform manual data restore. So you don't replace the original one. You are restoring as additional virtual disk. Then you perform manual restore of your data copy there. Okay. So these are a few scenarios here that we look into. So first thing, we have the Windows space file level restore. Windows space pretty easy. Your mouse server will be the one who actually mount and read the data, right? So this backup server will be connecting via the IPs of the mouse server to present and browse the data. Okay. So you will see that in your particular backup server, it will have a mount point pointing to the data that mounted here. So everything runs on Windows, pretty straightforward and easy. They can connect straight away. Now, if you see the mount path is empty, maybe due to some disconnection that happens earlier, you just need to trigger the task again. Then you will be able to see in the backup server the same mount point and data available. Okay, so this is for Windows backup data. If you are backing up Linux or Unix virtual machine or agent, for example, I can trigger the multi-OS file level recovery. Now, because your backup data here are Linux file system, only Linux or Unix machine able to read the file system. So your mouse server by default is a Windows. They do not able to support this file system. I will require additional help. Okay, one being your helper appliance virtual machine will be deployed into the EXXR machine to do this. This is optional now. Okay, this is optional now. If you have any, for example, Linux proxy or repository, then I can mount it here. Okay, your backup server will be utilizing this machine has their mount path using IP. Same thing, the backup server will be connecting to the helper appliance via IP. So the differences here is I do not require additional IP for the helper appliance VM temporary to use. I can utilize any component that is available in my environment already, which is running on Linux. So this is supported in version 11 now. Okay. Older version, the helper appliance VM is mandatory. Now, because the more Linux component they support, they can utilize them to mount the backup data straight away. Okay. For Linux file system at least. Okay. Linux file system. So from here, I can utilize the component without deploying the helper appliance VM here. Yeah? So it is much more flexible now. So when I mount the data, I can able to read the Linux or Unix file system so that the backup server will able to browse the content to select certain file to restore back to your production or exploit out, for example. Okay. So any questions so far until this point for your application item recovery topic and also your guest file system restore? Okay, so no question then. Let's move on to your lab again. You have another lab here for the object